like to cite a piece of the preamble of our FSM Constitution to remind us of what we as a nation stand for. Having known war, we hope for peace. Having been divided, we wish unity. Having been ruled, we seek freedom. Just what any refugee seeks and hopes for. Thank you, Kamangad, Pulo, Kalangan, and Kilisota.
Thank you, Timian. Opponents of the proposition, you have 5 minutes for your rebuttal.
Honorable judges, moderator, ladies and gentlemen, worthy opponents. There is no denying that refugees should be given a fair shot at a second chance. And we in the opposition do believe that as a nation deeply rooted in the traditions of respect, generosity, and hospitality, the FSM should do its part to secure fundamental rights and freedoms for these vulnerable people. However, the negative team finds that the current provisions in the 1951 Convention fall short of addressing the refugee crisis we are faced today. I would now like to address the points the affirmative brought up in their main argument. If I recall correctly, my opponent stated that by signing this convention, it could provide knowledge on the refugee situation and enhance our standing. However, if the FSM were truly on a mission to strengthen its influence and standing in the world, there are far more effective and rewarding ways of accomplishing this rather than signing this convention. Rather than allocating resources to address an issue that does not pose an immediate problem to the FSM should instead focus on things such as bolstering its economy and environment. We could look to the example of our island neighbor of Palau. Palau has managed to position itself as a pristine paradise and global voice in the fight against climate change due to its ambitious environmental initiatives and thriving tourism industry. Improving our economy would bolster our international standing more than signing this convention. The legal framework embedded in the 1951 Convention falls short of addressing the refugee crisis we have today. Article 1 of the Convention states that the term refugee shall only apply to individuals who have been displaced due to persecution during events occurring in Europe before 1951. What does that mean? It means that the Nepalese refugees who arrived on our shores in 2015 would not have been protected under this convention. It means that future climate change refugees would also not be protected by it. 1951 was 73 years ago. By now, any surviving refugees from World War II have either returned home, resettled in a new home, or have passed away. So who is this convention really protecting? Without its 1967 protocol, the 1951 Convention alone does not provide the FSM with a sufficient legal framework. Therefore, this proposition should be struck down. The FSM is already positioned to process refugees in a manner that aligns with the 1951 Convention. The Supreme Court Judicial Order number 2017-033 states that non-refoulement is embedded in the International Declaration of Human Rights. A refugee's right to due process is already protected under Article 4, Section 3 of the FSM Constitution. And number 3, a refugee's right to liberty and property is already protected by Title 12 of the FSM Code. My opponents also stated that by signing this convention, it will provide us with economic benefits. However, this is simply not true. The right to work provided in Chapter 3 of the Convention applies only to refugees from events that occurred in Europe before 1951. Today, any person in this subgroup is at least 73 years old, which is past the age for retirement. Therefore, it is very unlikely that they would bring much economic benefit to the FSM. If the FSM were truly motivated by potential economic benefits, the proposition would have included the 1967 Protocol, which would effectively remove all temporal and geographical limitations on the scope of this convention. However, the current proposition failed to include this crucial amendment, thus the proponent's point is moot. And lastly, our opponent stated that signing this convention will provide moral obligations. However, while we wholeheartedly agree that protecting refugees is consistent with the FSM's cultural values, the FSM should oppose this proposition given the serious pitfalls of the 1951 Convention.
Proponents, you now have 3 minutes to respond to the opponent's rebuttal.
Thank you for your rebuttal. I will now address your statements. By signing to be a part of this convention, we are addressing the needs of our nation. This is because we are starting something that may become more in the future, something that can be developed in the international level if our nation collaborates well. Once again, as stated in my argument, we must start from somewhere, and this is the beginning. The FSM is a perfect example of diverse cultures mixing together to be one. And by being a member of this convention, we are not alone in getting help from other countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. We will now move on and hear the main arguments from the opponents of the proposition. And you have 15 minutes for your main argument.
Honorable judges, esteemed moderator, worthy proponents, ladies and gentlemen. The first reason that the FSM should oppose this proposition is that the scope of the 1951 Convention is too limited to adequately address the refugee crisis of today, given its narrow definition of a refugee. The 1951 Convention emerged as a response to the huge surge in displaced persons in Europe that resulted from the widespread political persecution that characterized the era of World War II. This is the context that profoundly shaped the Convention and is evident in its definition of a refugee. Article 1 of the Convention defines a refugee as a person who has fled their home country because of political persecution as a result of events in Europe occurring before 1951. While the 1951 Convention was undoubtedly a groundbreaking instrument that played a pivotal role in addressing the problem that arose in the aftermath of World War II, the temporal and geographical constraints of this definition do not extend the Convention's protections to the new refugee situations of today. This poses a major problem, as today's refugees would not be protected by this limited definition. The UNHCR's 2023 mid-year report shows that 52% of all refugees originated from three main events and countries. Number one, the Syrian civil war, which started in 2011. Number two, the ongoing conflict in Afghanistan, which started 40 years ago. And number three, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which commenced in 2022. These three countries alone have produced 19 million refugees. However, given that none of them fit the limited definition of a refugee embedded in this convention, none of these refugees would actually be protected by it. The severe limitations of the 1951 Convention to address emerging refugee situations is made abundantly clear in the fact that it was later amended using the 1967 Protocol to remove the temporal and geographical constraints on the Convention's definition of a refugee. Mr. Adrian Edwards from the UNHCR office in Australia stated in our interview with him that the 1951 Convention and the 1967 Protocol are two mutually exclusive instruments. This means that accession to the 1951 Convention does not automatically make a country a member of the 1967 Protocol and vice versa. Given this fact, the negative team finds it baffling that the proposition fails to include the 1967 Protocol. 1951 was 73 years ago. By now, all refugees from those events have either returned to their country of origin, resettled somewhere else, or have passed away. What end is this proposition going to achieve by only including the 1951 Convention? The severe lack of foresight reflected in this proposition is the first reason it should be struck down. The second reason that the FSM should oppose this proposition is that the 1951 Convention does not have a body that enforces compliance among signatory nations. Most international treaties have an overseeing body that interprets and enforces the treaty. For example, the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW, is overseen by the CEDAW Committee, which interprets and enforces CEDAW. The UN Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons is interpreted and enforced by the UN Security Council and the International Court of Justice. The importance of an overseeing body cannot be overstated. These bodies ensure countries that are signatory to the treaties and conventions abide by the provisions relevant to those countries. For example, when North Korea became a signatory of the UN Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and failed to comply with the treaty, the UN Security Council imposed strict sanctions to penalize North Korea for failing with the treaty. Without a competent overseeing body, there is no way of ensuring that the international community complies with international treaties. The lack of an overseeing body has jeopardized the 1951 Convention's ability to provide a global standard for refugee treatment, as seen with the varying treatment of refugees among signatory countries like Turkey. In 2016, the Human Rights Watch reported that Turkish border guards were shooting and beating Syrian refugees fleeing across the Turkish-Syrian border to escape the Syrian civil war. We are talking about men, women, and children who have already been traumatized by the violence of war being intentionally shot at and beaten. Australia, a signatory country to the convention, is also infamous for its heinous policies for dealing with refugees it exiles to Nauru for detention. In 2016, Amnesty International described Australia's practice of exiling refugees to Nauru as both cruel and extreme. The Human Rights Watch reported that refugees forcibly transferred to Nauru were detained for prolonged periods of time in inhumane conditions. Furthermore, these vulnerable persons were denied appropriate medical care. The overall impression was that Australia and Nauru had intentionally structured its operations so that many refugees experienced a serious degradation of their mental health. It is clear that the 1951 Convention is not being enforced and implemented by a competent overseeing body. Given the varying treatment of refugees from signatory countries, it is clear that the Convention is not a global standard that the governments of the world can rely on. The failure of the 1951 Convention to provide a global standard of refugee treatment is the second reason why the FSM should reject this proposition. Now my speaking partner, Destiny Esiel, will explain our final two arguments as to why the FSM should oppose this proposition. Honorable judges, moderator, ladies and gentlemen. The third reason that the FSM should oppose this proposition is that the 1951 Convention lacks any mechanism that ensures equitable burden sharing. The preamble of the 1951 Convention states that the United Nations recognizes the international scope of the refugee problem and that the nature of the problem is such that a satisfactory solution can only be achieved with international cooperation. However, when you read the convention, nowhere is there mention of a system for burden or responsibility sharing. Nowhere is there provision that outlines equitable burden sharing of refugees. The lack of a system for burden sharing has led to an inequitable distribution of refugees between the nations of the world, especially since poorer countries and countries neighboring areas of conflict seem to be taking on a disproportionately large share of refugee crisis. According to the UNHCR's 2023 mid-year report, 69% of all refugees are being hosted in neighboring countries. This means that despite there being 149 signatory countries, only a handful of them are being inundated with a large majority of the global refugee population. Ideally, what should happen is countries that border conflict areas act as asylum states that process each asylum seeker's case, and once their refugee status is confirmed, they get resettled in a country that has the economic infrastructure to support them. However, the key findings in the UNHCR report show that the wealthier nations are shirking this responsibility. The 2023 report shows that high-income nations, which account for 60% of global wealth, only hosted 25% of all refugees. In comparison, poorer nations, which account for only 19% of the global GDP, hosted 75% of all refugees. The distribution of refugees is unfair and, quite honestly, does not make sense. Some developed countries like Canada and Switzerland are taking in refugees, but their numbers hardly compare with that of poorer nations. For example, Canada's GDP is twice that of Turkey, its productive land mass is more than twice that of Turkey, and yet it has resettled only 1.3% of the amount of refugees that are in Turkey. So what does this all mean for the FSM? The University of Michigan's director of the program in Refugee and Asylum Law, James C. Hathaway, who is also one of the world's leading experts on refugee law, explains succinctly in our email interview with him that the lack of a system for burden sharing presents a major risk for a small country like the FSM because the FSM, and I quote, would not be guaranteed any support from the international community. Refugees landing on the FSM shores would become, in both human and international terms, 100% this nation's responsibility. End quote. Supporting this resolution would be endorsing an instrument that asks all countries to share in responsibility of resettling refugees, but has no system in place to make this responsibility equitable among its member nations, thus leaving poorer countries with the heavy lifting. The failure of the 1951 Convention to ensure international cooperation and equitable burden sharing is the third reason that this proposition should be struck down. The fourth and final reason that the FSM should oppose this proposition is that the National Supreme Court has already declared that the FSM's existing legal framework already provides our government with the appropriate guidance to interact with refugees. Supreme Court Judicial Order number 2017-033 states that the FSM must recognize a refugee's fundamental right to non-refoulement, due process, liberty, and property as they are now embedded in international customary law. Furthermore, the judicial order clearly underscored that these fundamental rights find robust protection within FSM's existing legal framework. For instance, the right to non-refoulement is already embedded in the International Declaration of Human Rights,
which the FSM already recognizes by virtue of its membership to the United Nations. Similarly, Article 4, Section 3 of the FSM Constitution safeguards a refugee's right to due process, ensuring fair treatment under the law. Moreover, the rights to liberty and property are already enshrined within Title 12 of the FSM Code, offering substantive legal protection to refugees. The court order further highlighted that, and I quote, "In the absence of express legislation regarding refugees, the government need look no further than our own criminal procedures and substantially apply them within the administrative law context to guarantee compliance with due process under the FSM Constitution and international law." End quote. Using the guidance provided by this judicial order, the FSM government is better equipped to interact with refugees in a manner that aligns with our domestic legal standards, international obligations, and cultural values. The fact that our existing legal framework already provides acceptable procedures for future refugee interactions is the fourth and final reason that this proposition should be struck down. Let it be clear that the negative team believes that all persons, including refugees, should have their fundamental rights protected. However, given the major limitations and pitfalls of the 1951 Convention and the lack of international cooperation among member states, the negative team asserts that this proposition will fail to fulfill its intended purpose.
Thank you, opponents. Proponents, you have 5 minutes to rebut the opponent's main argument.
Thank you, opponents, for your arguments. I will now address statements that you have stated in your argument. First, our opponents mentioned that the definition of a refugee, according to the 1951 Refugee Convention, is too narrow and does not apply to our modern world. My team and I believe that this statement is wrong. After the World War, the definition of a refugee has not stayed the same. The definition of a refugee has been developed over the years and is being expanded to fit refugees in our modern world. It is still being discussed in the international level to fit us as climate refugees. The lack of equitable sharing. By becoming a member of this convention, we are encouraging cooperation as stated in our first argument. Being a member of this convention is not only a step to address refugees' needs, but to develop our nation and find better strategies to address refugees and our problems. Joining the 1951 Refugee Convention can serve as a crucial step for the FSM in strengthening international refugee protection, as it provides a framework for offering sanctuary to those fleeing persecution or conflict. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you, proponents. Opponents, you have 3 minutes to respond to the opponent's rebuttal.
Honorable judges, ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate the points raised by the proponents in their affirmative rebuttal. However, we still remain unconvinced and would like to address some points. If I recall correctly, our proponents did not rebuttal all of our main arguments. However, I will respond to those in rebuttal. Our proponents mentioned how the definition of the refugee is no longer limited because of the 1961 protocol. This assertion is unacceptable.
As was revealed by Mr. Adrian Edwards from the UNHCR, the 1951 Convention and the 1967 Protocol are two mutually exclusive treaties, meaning a country must sign them separately. However, this proposition does not include the protocol. Therefore, this debate is limited to the Convention definition of a refugee only. Thus, their point is irrelevant. Our proponents also mentioned how we would not be able to handle equitable burden sharing and our country cannot afford to see many refugees as Turkey. However, our opponents clearly did not understand our argument. It does not mean that every country will get the same amount of refugees. Equitable means fair in a way that recognizes each person has different circumstances and needs. This means a signatory country would only be obligated to host a number of refugees that corresponds to its capacity. But this convention does not provide that. The negative side sees this as a huge flaw.
Thank you, the opponents of the proposition. We will now move down and hear the summation or the conclusion of both parties' argument, and we will begin with the proponent's conclusion. And you have 4 minutes.
Taking everything into account, we would like to firstly thank the opposing team for their argument. They argued against the resolution based on resource constraints and more obligation to our people and how the convention does not provide our needs. We have expressed that 1, resources will always be available if we plan for it, and 2, is it not our moral obligation to help everyone? Regardless of what opponents argue for, we, the proponents, still stand firm with our arguments, which are the 3 main points, and they are: by ratifying the convention, it will strengthen the framework for international refugee protection, it will boost regional production, which will stimulate economic expansion, and it will make the charter states of Micronesia and the rest of the globe more united to address the needs to those who need it. Joining the 1951 Refugee Convention can serve as a crucial step for the Federated States of Micronesia in strengthening international refugee protection as it provides a framework for offering sanctuary to those fleeing persecution or conflict. This can also align with the goal of fostering international solidarity between the FSM and other nations, demonstrating a commitment to upholding human rights and contributing to global peace and stability. Additionally, by participating in the convention, the FSM can engage in broader international efforts to address refugee crisis, which in turn can enhance its standing in the global community and potentially attract support for initiatives aimed at increasing local productivity and economic growth. Ultimately, being a part of the convention can not only showcase FSM's dedication to humanitarian principles, but also bring about valuable partnerships and resources that can benefit both refugees and the country as a whole. By becoming a signatory member of the 1951 Refugee Convention, we are introducing fresh elements and welcoming new economic developments. By working together to address refugee issues, promote economic development, and build strong relationships with other countries, the FSM can contribute to a more peaceful and prosperous world. It is crucial for governments, organizations, and individuals to collaborate and support these efforts in order to create an inclusive and sustainable future for all. To draw attention to why we are strongly for the resolution, we know that helping others is the right thing to do. By signing to be part of the 1951 Refugee Convention, we are doing what is morally right, not just for the world, but for ourselves. Because one day, we may be the ones who need refuge. So for now, we must do what we set out to do from the very beginning as a young island nation. We hope for peace, we wish for unity, we seek freedom and liberty. Thank you and peace on Chuuk.
Thank you, Team Yap, proponents of the proposition, for your presentation. We will now move down and hear the opponent's conclusion. You have 4 minutes.
Honorable judges, esteemed moderator, respected timekeeper, ladies and gentlemen. The negative team would like to thank the affirmative team for their engaging arguments and for being great proponents on this important topic. 73 years ago, the world was still reeling from the aftermath of the Second World War, a conflict that left millions displaced and seeking refuge in foreign lands. In response to this humanitarian crisis, the nations of the world joined forces under the framework of the 1951 Convention, a groundbreaking agreement that sought to protect the fundamental rights and freedoms of refugees. During a time characterized by a strong yearning for peace, the international community embraced the spirit of the Convention, offering hope to those fleeing persecution and violence. Today, however, the world is confronted by a refugee crisis of unprecedented magnitude, with 36.4 million refugees reported by the UNHCR just last year. Despite the noble intentions behind the 1951 Convention, we must acknowledge that the solutions it provided over 7 decades ago are no longer adequate to address the complexities of the present-day refugee crisis. Therefore, the negative team wishes to reaffirm our stance that we strongly oppose the proposition which states, and I quote, "Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Federated States of Micronesia should become a signatory member to the 1951 Refugee Convention," end quote. In our main argument, we provided 4 robust reasons to support our position. Number 1. The temporal and geographical constraints in Article 1 of the 1951 Convention restricts its ability to address today's global crisis. Without its companion 1967 protocol, the Convention fails to protect those displaced beyond Europe or after 1951. The baffling exclusion of the protocol from this proposition indicates its short-sightedness. Number 2, the absence of an effective overseeing body to enforce compliance with the Convention has led to significant issues. Instances where member countries intentionally inflict physical and mental harm on refugees demonstrate that the 1951 Convention does not provide a dependable global standard for nations to follow. Number 3, the Convention's failure to establish a mechanism for equitable burden sharing among member nations is a compelling reason for the FSM to oppose this proposition. This has led to poorer nations bearing an unfair burden, while states bordering conflict areas struggle to manage large refugee influxes without adequate support or solidarity from other member states. And number 4, per Judicial Order number 2017-033, refugees within FSM's borders can find that their fundamental rights and freedoms are already protected in our existing legal frameworks. Thus, adopting this comprehensive framework is not a priority for the FSM. Honorable judges, the course of this debate has made it abundantly clear that this proposition has many flaws, and supporting it poses a huge and unnecessary risk to the FSM. Therefore, we urge you to side with the negative team for this debate.
Thank you, Bombay Team 1, the opponent of the proposition. That brings us to the conclusion of the presentation from both teams. And we will now move down to the questioning part. The judges will have time to question both teams. And these questions are for clarifications only.
Thank you, both teams. I have two questions. The first question is for the affirmative side, for YAP. Is the 1967 protocol also considered part of customary international law? Meaning that irrespective of the FSM ratifying the protocol or the convention, we are still obligated to accept refugees and provide safe haven under international law as our obligation.
Debaters, if you don't understand the question, you can ask the judges to repeat or to narrow it down so that you can.
You argued here today that the 1951 Convention on Refugees is customary international law, meaning that the FSM has a legal obligation, irrespective of ratification, of us providing safe haven and processing refugees that show up at our shores. Is this same requirement placed upon us by the 1967 protocol, meaning that we also have to abide by it as customary international law? Is the 1967 protocol customary international law?
Thank you, Judge, for your statement. The 1967 protocol is an international law, and by being part of this convention, it does not mean that it does not mean that we follow exactly what it says, but it is correct. Thank you.
Thank you. This question is for the opponents on page 1, SBA. You argued here today that there is no oversight body to essentially enforce or monitor implementation of the 1951 Convention on Refugees. What is the role then of the International Court of Justice as well as the UN Security Council, which has to this day been taking measures to address both the Syrian refugee crisis as well as the refugees coming out of the war in Ukraine? Does the International Court of Justice have any role in protecting or enforcing the 1951 Convention? Does the UN Security Council have any role in enforcing and protecting, enforcing the Refugee Convention?
Thank you for that question. From what we understand, the 1951 Convention does not have any overseeing body at all. Thank you.
I have a question I'd like to direct to the team on the SDA. God forbid World War III breaks out in the Pacific between the United States and China. It is estimated that the second line of defense would ultimately fall somewhere around the outer islands, including potentially Yap. If such an event were to occur, would that affect the way that you perceive the effects of the Refugee Convention on the citizens of the FSM themselves? In the unlikely event that World War III were to explode in the Pacific region, it is conceivable that the FSM would be the second line of defense or an instrumental part of a global war, which is something that would is potentially affecting the FSM citizens themselves. Does that event significantly alter the positions that you might take on your opposition to the convention?
Thank you for that question. So from what we understand is that, let's say there was a World War III that broke out, this convention, and if we were to become refugees, we would not be protected under it, because this convention only protects refugees from events occurring in Europe before 1951. And it's very unlikely that we see a large influx of refugees if it were to break out, let's say, in America, because we're far from those conflict zones. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask, direct this team to a question to Yap. You mentioned that one day we may be the ones who are in need of refuge. If there was a global conflict in the Pacific, how do you think this would affect the citizens of the FSM, specifically in potentially being relocated from islands that they currently live on? Ultimately, I'm interested in your statement that it may be the people of the FSM may be the ones who are in need of refuge, and ultimately the explosion of a global conflict in the Pacific could displace actual citizens of the FSM. Well, where would they go? What would they do in the absence of the convention, refugee convention?
Thank you for your question. So, let's say if there was a conflict in our region and if people of the FSM had to be relocated, there are many countries that we have built relationships with that we may be able to relocate to. For example, United States and the United Nations are countries that we already have established relationships with. Additionally, I would like to add that we are global refugees, and relocations have already happened to some of our islands since sea level rise has been happening. So, to address your question, if we were to become refugees in our islands, we would turn to the United Nations and United States for help. Thank you.
I have a question for each team. I'll begin with the proponents. Oh, that's the team SDA. My question is, it is your argument that there is no equitable burden sharing, meaning that there's a looming fear that we might be burdened with refugees, is that correct? The fear, the argument for your, there is no equitable burden sharing is that there's a fear that if we become signatory to the convention, we would be hosting a large number of refugees, correct? Is that your argument? So your argument number 4, would you like to restate that? That's the argument where the more developed countries are taking in less refugees and the poorer countries. Is that the argument? Did I understand that argument correctly? Okay.
The fourth and final reason that the FSM should oppose this proposition is that the National Supreme Court has already declared that FSM's existing legal framework.
I apologize, number 3, your third argument. It's a numbering issue.
The third reason that the FSM should oppose this proposition is that the 1951 Convention lacks any mechanism that ensures equitable burden sharing.
Yes. So as I understand that argument, there's a fear that if we become signatory to the convention, that we might take on a larger number of refugees. Is that correct? So according to the GAP team, we should help out because we don't know if we might need help one day. How would you respond to that argument?
Thank you for that question. While we wholeheartedly agree that helping refugees is the right thing to do, we found that it might not be the best option to help refugees given the many pitfalls it has. Thank you.
Thank you. My question for YAP team is, if I understand your argument, it's that if we become a signatory to the convention, it would aid in economic development. Is that correct? Could you clarify that argument further? What types of economic development would that bring for our islands?
Thank you for your question. So, as stated in our second argument, being a part of this convention will provide social and economic opportunities for the FSM. Refugees, according to the World Bank report, it states that refugees contribute to their economy through entrepreneurship, innovation, and job creation. So when refugees come to our islands, if we do become part of the convention, once they find their footing and they become settled, they will be able to pay taxes for our islands and create jobs and share ideas that will help better develop our economy for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all.
This is my last question, I promise. This question is for Pompey, 1 SDA team. You argued here today that there are existing legal frameworks that will enable the protection of refugees. And you provide an example of the Nepalese who I came here, arrived on our shores in 2015. Now, what happened with the Nepalese was that they weren't given permanent status in the FSM. The FSM is acting essentially as a third-party country referral system. So is the actual existing legal framework sufficient to provide permanent status to refugees who actually arrive here? When we have a prime example that those Nepalese were either returned to their home country of origin or were resettled in Europe and other places. Do we have a sufficient existing legal framework when the FSM currently operates just as a resettlement country? We don't actually provide permanent status to refugees who arrive on our shores. So is that enough? Is that sufficient? If they cannot come here and get permanent status to live, work, reside, become citizens, etc., like other countries provide.
Thank you for that question. I think the major components in the convention that we're bound to abide by is sufficient to help them gain permanent status. Thank you.
Thank you, judges, for the questions, and ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the first debate. And once again, let's give both team a big round of applause for the hard work. Thank you, both teams. I noticed that it's lunchtime, so right now it's 12:08, so we will break for lunch for 1 hour, and we'll be back in here at 1:30 for the next debate. The next debate will be between Team Koshai and Team Chuuk. We start at 8, and also welcome those that are tuned in live via Facebook. And this is the second debate, and again, the proposition for this year reads, "Be it resolved that the various states of Micronesia should become a signatory member of the 1951 Refugee Convention." So this afternoon, the second debate will be between the state of Koshai debating proponents of the proposition, and the opponents of the proposition would be this state of Chuuk. And debating out of state of Koshai, we have Sisu or Aloha, and Francis M. Naparte, and Maisha Ruth S. George. And they are coached by Lina R. George. And for the Chuuk team, we have Kalua Xavier Kaminaka Chilane, and Owen Anno Ray Jr., Faith R.K. Michael, and they are coached by Esther Asol. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second debate. We will now begin the debate with the introduction from both the proponents and the opponents, and we will begin with the proponents of the proposition with your introduction, and you have 3 minutes for your introduction.
Morning, everyone. I would like to start our debate by giving thanks to our Heavenly Father for His presence and blessings. We would also like to pay our humble respects to the leaders and the great state of Chuuk for hosting this year's National Law Day debates, to the great state of Chuuk for hosting, and to other FSM states for the participation, hard work, and attention. Ladies and gentlemen, this year's topic for debate, which states that, and I quote, "Be it resolved that the Federated States of Micronesia become a signatory member of the 1951 National Refugee Convention," end quote. This is a very challenging issue, especially for the FSM's high school students today, who did not grow up in areas of war or armed conflict, and therefore do not fully understand the trials and tribulations that a refugee has to go through. My partner and I are still trying to fully understand the significance and deliberations behind this topic, and we will do our best to persuade you that though challenging, the necessity of becoming a signatory member of the 1951 Refugee Convention is of great importance. We will be arguing the following main points. Firstly, the international associations and partnerships. Second, assistance from global communities. Third, solidifying shared humanitarian responsibilities. And fourth, increased productivity. Our team will present the details and supporting facts in our main argument. In the book of Luke chapter 6, verse 31 of the Holy Bible, it is stated, and I quote, "Do to others as you would have them do to you," end quote. This is universally understood as the golden rule. We must be humane towards others so that others can be humane towards us. On September 20th, 2016, at the United Nations in New York, Barack Obama stated, and I quote, "This crisis is a test of our common humanity. Whether we give in to suspicion and fear and build walls, and whether we see ourselves in one another," end quote. He was speaking about the 20 million plus refugees taken from their homes and families and are still praying to find ways to survive. From Yap to Koshai, our differences makes us unique, but also brings us together as a nation. And as a nation, it is only right that we share the hospitality and extend to others. And it is also right to practice what we preach, and that is, love one another as He has loved us. Thank you.
Thank you, proponents. We will now hear the introduction from the opponents of the proposition, and you have 3 minutes.
Good morning, honorable judges, worthy opponents, ladies and gentlemen. I am Paul Lorraine Jr. and I'm a senior at Chuuk. I stand here today to introduce the opposing side of this year's debate topic. Be it resolved that the Federated States of Micronesia should become a signatory member of the 1951 Refugee Convention. As we delve into the topic through our extensive research, we identified that the 1951 Refugee Convention and its contents would prove to be a disadvantage for 3 main reasons. First and foremost, we lack the resources to meet the needs of refugees stated in the 1951 Refugee Convention. The rights and provisions that are listed in the 1951 Refugee Convention to provide for refugees are housing, food, education, and healthcare. Those aforementioned provisions already have existing challenges that our country faces at the moment. Besides the mentioned provisions, we are also experiencing first-hand shortages of resources here in the FSM. Secondly, we are still a developing nation. Therefore, we do not have the financial capability to provide for refugees. This can be supported by the fact that we still rely heavily on compact funding to help fund our nation. Compact funding is split into 5 ways: national government, PONPE, YAP, Chuuk, and Koshai. In our main speech, we will give you evidence showing how we are not financially ready to be a signatory member of the convention. Lastly, it is not worth the risk of problems that might arise within the FSM when becoming a signatory member of the 1951 Refugee Convention. Thank you.
Thank you, opponents. We will now move on and hear the main arguments, and we will begin with the proponents' main argument. And you have 15 minutes for your main argument.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now present our main points and supporting statements for accepting the 1951 Refugee Convention. For our first main point, international associations and partnerships. Joining the 1951 Convention shows FSM's dedication to global humanitarian values and cooperation with other nations. By becoming a member, FSM joins a worldwide network committed to safeguarding refugee rights and dignity. This affiliation opens doors to valuable partnerships, allowing FSM to collaborate with international communities to tackle the complex challenges of forced displacement and refugee protection. This partnership enabled FSM to leverage resources, expertise, and best practices from across the globe. By fostering cooperative relationships, FSM not only enhances its own resilience and governance, but also contributes to broader regional and global initiatives aimed at achieving equitable outcomes for all individuals affected by displacement. Participating in the convention enhances FSM's international standing, demonstrating its commitment to addressing global issues and contributing to peace, stability, and human rights globally. Firstly, becoming a signatory member enhances legal and diplomatic frameworks. Membership in the 1951 Convention not only underscores FSM's humanitarian commitment, but also provides a strong legal framework for managing refugee issues at home. By adopting the Convention standards, FSM establishes clear guidelines for how refugees are treated within its borders, ensuring their rights to asylum, protection from forced return, and access to essential services. This legal clarity strengthens FSM's governance, promoting transparency and accountability in refugee management. Furthermore, aligning with global norms enhances FSM's diplomatic relations, strengthening credibility, and facilitating smoother negotiations on broader regional and global challenges beyond refugee issues. Secondly, joining the 1951 Convention offers FSM opportunities for capacity building and institutional strengthening. As stated in a document from the UN High Commissioner for Refugees urging the FSM to accede, submitted April 2010 to the FSM, through conventions, workshops, and training programs facilitated by international organizations and fellow member states, FSM can enhance the skills and knowledge of its officials, judiciary, and civil society involved in refugee affairs. This investment in human capital not only improves refugee protection, but also boosts overall governance capacity. FSM can leverage these enhanced capabilities to address immediate refugee challenges and advance broader developmental goals. Lastly, beyond legal frameworks and capacity building, membership in the 1951 Convention elevates FSM's reputation as a responsible global citizen committed to human rights. Actively participating in convention reviews, conferences, and forums allows FSM to influence global discussions on refugee issues, advocating for policies that reflect its unique challenges and perspectives. This proactive engagement amplifies FSM's voice on the international stage and positions it as a leader in a regional effort to address displacement causes and find lasting solutions for refugees. For second main point, assistance from the global community. One of the key advantages of FSM's membership in the Refugee Convention is gaining access to support and assistance from the global community. By becoming a member, FSM becomes eligible for financial aid, technical support, and initiatives aimed at building capabilities, all provided by international organizations and donor countries as provided on InsightPhilanthropy.org, a list of donors and foundations that contribute to the support of refugees. This support is crucial for enhancing FSM's ability to provide effective protection and assistance to refugees within its borders. Membership in the 1951 Convention opens doors to increased resource mobilization and support from the global community. By aligning with international standards and commitments outlined in the Convention, FSM gains access to a wider range of financial aid and developmental assistance specifically earmarked for refugee protection and humanitarian relief efforts as proposed by the U.S. Department of State under the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. International organizations like the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, IOM, National Catholic Fund for Migration and Refugees, regional bodies, and donor countries prioritize assistance to countries that uphold international refugee law and demonstrate a commitment to refugee welfare. This support not only funds crucial needs such as healthcare, education, and livelihood programs in refugee camps, but also strengthens FSM's infrastructure and logistical capabilities for managing refugee flows more effectively. Additionally, beyond humanitarian concerns, FSM's adherence to the Refugee Convention contributes to advancing national and regional security issues. The Convention provides a structured framework for refugee protection and management, helping FSM mitigate potential security risks associated with irregular migration and refugee influxes. Clear and consistent asylum procedures in accordance with international law promote orderly migration flows and reduce vulnerabilities that can be exploited by transnational criminal networks or extremist groups. This proactive stance enhances FSM's resilience to external threats, fosters regional stability, and promotes economic development benefiting both host countries and refugee populations. I will now pass on the floor to my partner Chuuk to finish off our main points.
I will present the remaining details in our main points. For our third main point, solidifying shared humanitarian responsibilities. At its core, the 1951 Refugee Convention embodies the principle of shared humanitarian responsibilities. The belief that every nation has the moral duty to safeguard the rights and dignity of its refugees. By joining as a signatory member, the FSM reaffirms its commitment to these foundational principles and also aligns itself with a global consensus on protecting refugees. This solidarity with the international community sends a clear message about the FSM's values, showing its dedication to uphold human rights, fostering social justice, and offering refuge to those in need. Martin Luther King Jr. once stated, and I quote, "Commit yourself to the noble struggle for human rights. You will make yourself a greater person and a greater nation of your country and a finer world to live in," end quote. To start with, the FSM's membership in the convention not only shows its dedication to these responsibilities, but also strengthens its leadership in ethics and morality on the world stage. By following the convention's principles, the FSM sets an example for responsible governance and ethical behavior in protecting refugees. This means actively supporting refugee rights worldwide and advocating for peaceful solutions to displacement issues. Through partnerships and diplomatic efforts, the FSM can influence global policies that prioritize compassion and solidarity. Additionally, being part of the convention helps the FSM promote social justice and human rights both locally and globally. In 2021, at the Welcome with Dignity campaign to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the convention, leaders of organizations like Mike Breen, President and CEO of the Human Rights First, Denise Bell of Ethnicity International USA, Bruce Leslie, President of First Focus on Children, as well as countless others, reminded the U.S. that they, and I quote, helped draft and later pledged to abide by, signifying their nation's commitment to protecting the rights and dignity of people seeking safety, end quote. By following the convention's guidelines, the FSM ensures that refugees in its borders are treated fairly and have access to necessary services like healthcare and education. This not only meets the legal obligations, but also fosters respect for human rights and diversity within the FSM. The FSM's adherence to international standards also strengthens its reputation as a defender of human rights on regional and global stages, advocating for vulnerable groups. And for our fourth and final main point, the increased productivity. Membership in the Refugee Convention has the potential to significantly enhance the FSM's productivity and economic development. According to GorgonProject.org, a humanitarian organization, says, and I quote, by welcoming in refugees into its communities, the hosting country taps into a diverse pool of talent, skills, and knowledge, enriching its labor market and stimulating innovation and entrepreneurship, end quote. Refugees will bring with them valuable experiences and perspectives that contribute to the cultural and intellectual diversity of the FSM society, fostering creativity and collaboration across various sectors. As a result, the FSM stands to benefit from increased productivity, competitiveness, and resilience in the face of global challenges. Firstly, becoming a signatory contributes to the improvement in job marketing. The influx of refugees into the FSM labor force can lead to an expansion of job opportunities and diversification skills and expertise. Refugees often possess valuable skills and experiences that complement the existing workforce, filling gaps in sectors such as healthcare, education, and infrastructure development. Refugee entrepreneurship can drive the economic growth and create business opportunities. contributing to job creation and wealth generation in FSM communities. Another reason is the enhancement in cultural and social enrichment. Membership in the convention enriches the FSM's cultural fabric by integrating diverse refugee communities into its society. Refugees bring in their rich cultural traditions, languages, and customs, which contribute to the cultural diversity and vibrancy of the FSM. This cultural exchange not only enhances social cohesion, but also promotes mutual understanding and tolerance among different ethnic and cultural groups within the FSM. Our FSM preamble states, and I quote, "We respect the diversity of our cultures. Our differences enrich us," end quote. By embracing diversity and inclusivity, the FSM can create more dynamic and resilient societies that value and celebrate its mutual cultural heritage. Now imagine the long-term economic benefits that the FSM would gain from this convention. Welcoming refugees can yield long-term economic benefits for the FSM. As refugees integrate into the labor market and society, they contribute to economic growth through increased customer spending, tax revenues, and investment in local businesses. Studies have shown that the refugees, once integrated, have the potential to become net contributors to the economy over time, boosting productivity and enhancing overall competitiveness of the FSM in the global marketplace. Moreover, the skills and knowledge acquired by refugees can be passed on to future generations, further enriching the FSM's human capital and driving sustained economic development. In joining the 1951 Refugee Convention, the FSM not only demonstrates its commitment to global humanitarian values, but also enhances its international standing as a proactive leader in refugee protection, fostering partnerships that promote peace, stability, and human rights worldwide. As it is stated in the FSM preamble, and I quote, "We extend to all nations what we seek from each: peace, friendship, cooperation, and love in our common humanity." Once again, love in our common humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, proponents. We will now hear the rebuttal from the opponents, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, positive team, for your main speech. However, I am still not convinced. Judges, let me go down their outline. 1, they mentioned about UN and assistance globally. We are already a part of the UN, and so we will do our best to assist refugees. But we don't have to join the convention to do so. We can help with funding or help in any other way other than joining the convention. 2, they mentioned about humanitarian obligation. Our humanitarian obligation is what we look at as we are a part of the UN. However, what will not be humanitarian as if we brought in refugees and we know that we are not capable of hosting them. We lack the resources, the amount of land that is private makes it difficult to allow refugees to occupy land. And the amount of problems that can come with refugees will overwhelm our undeveloped nation. 3, they mentioned about global assistance or better reputation. The building or gain of reputation all comes down to how well we manage the refugees and if they positively impact the FSM. However, the impacts to countries like Lebanon, according to the European Commission, were devastating and caused the economy to almost collapse, which further proves how it would not bolster our reputation, and it depends on how the FSM handles its pressure. Lastly, they mentioned about the increase in productivity. Refugees that are brought in could provide more to the labor force and bring skills that needed. But let's look at Lebanon. 71% of households were unable to access skilled or reliable work. Rising unemployment rates, especially among youth, which provided an insight on how refugees were unable to find any or reliable work from ILO's article on ILO's support to refugees and host communities in Turkey. And so, it would cause problems for the locals in finding jobs, and we have to look at the well-being and safety of the FSM citizens first. Thank you, judges. I just attend all the main points. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, opponents. And proponents, you have 3 minutes to respond to opponents' rebuttal.
Thank you, opponents. Judges, I will now respond to our opponents' concerns and questions. For your first concern, you mentioned humanitarian assistance. In our first main point, international associations and partnerships, we stated that in a document from the UN High Commissioner for Refugees urging the FSM to accede, through its conventions, workshops, and training programs facilitated by international organizations and fellow member states, FSM can enhance the skills and knowledge of its officials, judiciary, and civil society involved in refugee affairs. Your second concern, you mentioned financial assistance. We also mentioned a list of donor countries and organizations such as the UNHCR, IOM, and all these other organizations. These are organizations that are willing to help assist with finance. In your third concern, you mentioned countries like Lebanon and Turkey. These are big countries that are already well developed. FSM is just a small aspect in the Pacific Ocean. When joining the 1951 Refugee Convention, we put ourselves out there and we amplify our voices. Thank you.
Thank you, proponents, for your response. And now we will move on with the main arguments from the opponents, and you have 15 minutes.
Good evening, everyone, honorable judges, worthy debaters, ladies and gentlemen. I am Kolowai Xavier Kamaraga Johani, and I will be representing the opposing side of our topic. The resolution states, be it resolved that the Federated States of Micronesia shall become a signatory member of the 1951 Refugee Convention. This is an issue of conflict that we should take into careful consideration. And as the proposing side gave their thoughts and reasons on our topic, we have listened very carefully. However, we still firmly believe that the best decision for the FSM is to not join the 1951 Refugee Convention. Now, to mention, UNHCR is an organization that mainly focuses on assisting refugees in finding a new home. To begin, I would like to read what defines a refugee according to them. It states, refugees are people forced to flee from their home country and seek safety in another country. They are unable to turn to their own country because of feared persecution as a result of who they are, what they believe in or say, or because of armed conflict, violence, or serious public disorder. This shows what makes or defines a refugee, but what comes with the refugees are the legal obligations and rights they have. They would basically be treated the same as the nationals or the citizens of that nation. They would have the same rights and obligations like education, healthcare, work, and etc. Looking at the 1951 Refugee Convention, it is a treaty between the nations and countries that allow them to take in refugees and to recognize the legality of refugees. Although they could have positive impacts on the country or state, like how our worthy opponents discussed, we have found solid evidence on the various negative effects outweighing the positive on countries that are a part of the convention. First and foremost, we oppose the FSM joining the convention because of the limited resources that we have. As the negative team, we understand that giving a helping hand to those in need is the moral and humanitarian thing to do. However, if we cannot provide for ourselves and those we are helping, then it completely destroys the whole idea of moral and humanitarian obligation. The limited resources we have is one factor that the FSM should consider first before determining whether we have the ability to provide the needs for refugees. Our first concern is the accommodations the FSM will have to provide for the refugees. A type of accommodation is living space or land, and it is a resource that the FSM would have difficulty providing due to land ownership, and a great example of that is here in Chuuk. We interviewed Chief Land Commissioner Dominic Always, and he explained how more than 90% of land here in Chuuk is privately owned by individuals or family bloodlines, while only 10% is owned by the government. All of the land owned by the government is occupied and taken already. And private landowners are also protected by the Chuuk Constitution of Article 4, Traditional Rights. And it states, traditional rights over all reefs, tidelands, and other submerged lands, including their water columns and successors' rights thereto, are recognized. The legislature may regulate the reasonable use. And to mention Article 8, Section 4 and 5 of the FSM Constitution, it states a non-citizen or corporation not wholly owned by citizens may not acquire title to land or waters in Micronesia. A lease agreement for the use of land for an indefinite term by a non-citizen, a corporation not wholly owned by citizens, or any government is prohibited. Now, what does this mean? This means that in the case of land or living space, the nation would need to work together to find a solution to allow refugees to occupy and inhabit these lands. This would be needed because not only the state of Chuuk, but the entire FSM has land laws that would prove to be difficult to allow refugees to so-called operate land, as there would be challenges like what land to use and how it would work if they decide to stay for a long or permanent term, which is completely legal. Subsequently, the food security and stored goods are limited, and this poses as another concern. In the FSM's case, our advancement in many areas are struggling due to the location of our nation. And our agriculture, especially with the naturally grown foods here, we are unable to sustain ourselves with our increasing population. As mentioned in the 2023 Action Plan report for the Federated States of Micronesia, the sector growth has been sluggish for the past 10 years. The lack of coherent policy and a solid legal and regularity framework has inhibited strategic action and dissipated the already limited human and financial resources. To include, in a high-level conference concerning the FSM about world food security, the Honorable Masao Yokohama stated the food security is not just about the current increase in basic food prices. It is also about the chronic, long-term crisis of structural food insecurity and about increasing unhealthiness of our people due largely to the flood of imports of more convenient, cheaper foods with low nutritional value. Now, this acknowledges the challenges of FSM's limited resources and proves how we should join the 1951 Refugee Convention because we are unable to in our current state. Another resource to put into perspective is our natural resources. First of all, our island-grown supplies here in the FSM are seasonal. This means harvesting does not happen year-round. This leads to the minimal supplies which are provided daily by locals, where we can see how they are barely able to sustain the entirety of the FSM. In our interview with EPA, the studies that they conducted with National Geographic showed how the fish we have here in Chuuk are becoming scarce near the reefs due to overfishing. This is because everything from the land to the sea is a source of income, food, and cultural practice for the locals, and at the moment, it is being overwhelmed. Furthermore, water is another type of resource that needs careful consideration as well. To add in, all the states in the FSM have a limited natural resource, and having to provide for more individuals puts the people at risk. Now, if you weren't aware, back in March of 2024, the Honorable President Wesley Simina declared a state of emergency because of a crisis involving the lack of water in the following states: Yap, Pohnpei, and Chuuk. And so this declaration admits the current and continuing emergency of the lack of water or resources. Point number 2, we should not be a signatory member of the 1951 Refugee Convention due to how we are not financially capable and how we are still underdeveloped. The FSM has a yearly budget of around $300 million or $60 million per year through the Compact of Free Association provided by the U.S. under Article 1, Section 211, and it states, FSM is given $60 million annually for 5 years commencing on the effective date of this compact, $51 million annually for 5 years commencing on the 5th anniversary of the effective date of this compact, and $40 million annually for 5 years commencing on the 10th anniversary of the effective date of this compact. This money is then taken and split between 5: national government, Pohnpei State, Chuuk, Yap, and Kushrai. And with the money that each state receives, the economic development is currently growing at a slow rate as it is difficult due to the financial cap put in place. According to the economic overview study done by CIA from 2020 through 2024, it showed that, for example, Chuuk was labeled as a lower middle income economy. And so this comes to show that in the case of the FSM joining the convention, there are still many ways for us to develop in order to achieve efficiency in all areas. Also, it would be too costly to make this decision that could possibly take a negative toll on the FSM, its departments, and its people. In an interview with the Honorable Speaker Mersai, he explained how Chuuk would have his difficulty in hosting refugees due to how our state is still underdeveloped. This would make it hard for us to be able to provide the obligations required in the convention. In our discussion with His Excellency, President Simina, on his views about becoming a part of the convention, he stated that the FSM does not have the infrastructure yet to become a part of the convention, and we are still working to improve. Lastly, being part of the convention is not worth the risk of problems that might arise within the FSM. Concern for the FSM citizens and their well-being between both the refugees and nationals should be the FSM's #1 priority. When we interviewed the Director of Department of Health here in Chuuk, he informed us that there are only 6 doctors and an estimated number of less than 100 total healthcare workers here in Chuuk. He expressed how they struggle to provide quality care due to the insufficient number. And to mention with Pohnpei being the most developed state in the FSM, it still is underdeveloped in many ways because in the public health dialogue for Pohnpei, the Honorable Del Pangilinan stated, "Our system has been chronically underdeveloped and underfunded. About 1/5 of Pohnpei State's total health budget is being spent in Hawaii and Manila on less than 1% of our population. And so, it is reckless for us to try to help others when we are struggling ourselves. Adding on to the already full plate is careless and unwise. Another outcome that could lead to more trouble than it is worth is the differences we would have that would be rushed if we did join the convention. In the FSM Constitution, Article 4, Section 2, it states no law may be passed respecting an establishment of religion or impairing the free exercise of religion except that assistance may be provided to parochial schools for non-religious purposes. In the 1951 Refugee Convention, Article 3, under non-discrimination, it states the contracting states shall apply the provisions of this convention to refugees without discrimination as to race, religion, or country of origin. Furthermore, Article 4 of religion states that the contracting states shall accord to refugees within their territories treatment at least as favorable as that accorded to their nationals, with respect to freedom to practice their own religion and freedom as regards the religious education of their children. Now, in our interview with the Honorable Floor Leader of the State of Chuuk Legislature, he mentioned how our different cultures, views, and values would be something that could happen and we would have a problem with. This begged the question whether bringing in refugees would disrupt the FSM in a positive or negative way. We can already see how social tensions arise in Hawaii and Guam due to our cultural differences that we face when living abroad. And so, we shouldn't join the convention as the problems it poses can be avoided and we can better prepare for it. In our interview with the former Attorney General of the FSM, the Honorable Joseph Gallon, we learned how there was actually a case where more than 60 Vietnamese on 5 illegal boats were detained in the state of Yap. They had no source of identification, and it was hard to even communicate with them or find out who they were. We built up tents for them and gave them 3 meals a day, as we are part of the UN, and that is what we were supposed to do, until they were incarcerated because we weren't a part of the convention. If we were a part of the convention, when we have cases where it involves unidentified terrestrials being found on our shores without proper ID, the reality will be us having to deal with them differently if we were a part of the convention. And so my question is it really necessary for the FSM to jump in and join the 1951 Refugee Convention when we do not need it? And my answer is no. Thank you.
Thank you, opponents, for your main argument. Now, opponents, you will have 5 minutes to rebut the opponent's main argument.
And the opponents, judges, I will now try to rebut our opponent's main points. Your first main point, lack of resources. In our first main point, we mentioned, let's say, international organizations are willing to donate resources and money to help fund this infrastructure to start building refugee camps and support, find food for refugees. All of your main 3 points are concerning finance. While there may be initial costs associated with implementing the standards of the 1951 Convention, these investments by these donor countries can lead to long-term benefits. For example, so international funding and support can help offset some of the financial burdens. Moreover, improved refugee management can lead to economic opportunities and development benefits for FSM, contributing to overall stability and resilience. Under Article 17 of the 1951 Refugee Convention, under wage earning employment, it states that refugees lawfully staying in territory of a contracting state shall have the right to engage in wage earning management, which falls under your third main point, is concerning the lack of opportunities or job opportunities for this short number of workers. With this refugees coming in, they bring in a variety of skill sets that can fill in these gaps. Thank you.
Thank you, opponents. Now, opponents, you have 3 minutes to respond to the rebuttal.
Thank you, positive team, for your rebuttal. But judges, let me respond to the rebuttal. I will go down my outline. First, the positive team said something about we can build camps with the help of other nations. Well, I will respond by saying it won't be wise to join the 1951 Refugee Convention if we lack the resources. Now, they said something about building camps here in the FSM. But first, one of my points, I said that we lack the land here in the FSM, and so we wouldn't be able to build on any land if we do not have. In my main speech, I talked about how Pohnpei, Yap, and Chuuk declared a state of emergency from the lack of water. And so it would be unwise to bring in refugees even though we are lacking in water and other resources. Secondly, in their main speech, they talked about the workforce. This is only positive if they actually contribute, but it takes financial aid and resources to firstly get them back on their feet. However, still, we do not have the means to do so, and so it would be unwise to join the convention because it would make us, it would allow the nations to bring in refugees and allow them to host refugees here in the FSM. But we cannot do that if we do not have, again, the financial aid, we do not have the natural resources, and we do not have receipts from the compact, which basically shows that we are not getting any financial aid yet. Until we have receipts, then we can show that we can build and develop our nation. And so last thing I would say is we shouldn't join the convention because we are still lacking in the resources, both land, financial, and natural resources. Secondly, we are incapable of bringing them in. And lastly, we shouldn't join because we don't have to join in order to help the refugees. Thank you.
Thank you, opponents. We will now move down to the summation or the conclusion from both sides, and we will begin with the proponent's conclusion, and you have 4 minutes.
Judges, ladies and gentlemen, one of the first questions that came to mind when we were faced with this topic of acceding to the 1951 Refugee Convention was, how can this tiny island handle an influx of refugees? The next was, how are we going to provide for refugees when we cannot even provide for ourselves? The automatic answer was impossible. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with these questions that drive people to create innovations that were first created impossible. Thomas Edison created an innovation to light up the darkness. The Wright brothers created an innovation to enable people to fly high above the clouds. Florence Nightingale started the movement to form the Red Cross. And the list goes on and on. Without challenges, innovations cannot be created. The affirmative team has provided you with 3 concrete reasons that support FSM's accession to the 1951 Refugee Convention. The world as we know today is made up of networks and connection, which is exactly what we laid out for you in our first main point, international associations and partnerships. FSM will be enhancing the legal and diplomatic frameworks, having opportunities for capacity building and institutional strengthening, as well as elevating our reputation as a responsible global citizen. It does not stop there. FSM will receive assistance from the global community in terms of financial assistance, technical support, and initiatives aimed at building FSM's capabilities to assist refugees. The financial aspect may not be comparable to combat funding, but in reality, that assistance earmarked especially for refugees will be a blessing in disguise by strengthening the infrastructure to provide healthcare, education, and crucial needs for refugees. Becoming a signatory member enhances FSM's reputation as a global citizen who protects refugees and their rights and dignity. We will be showing the world that we are humanitarians as well, and as a nation we promote social justice and human rights. Finally, studies have proven that refugees bring in a wealth of skills and knowledge that have increased productivity in hosting countries. Increased consumer spending, tax revenues, and investments in local businesses lead to increased economic development, which has been a big concern for the FSM government. This opportunity will definitely be an answer to FSM's economic challenges and sustainable issues. Judges, fellow debaters, ladies and gentlemen, innovations are a result of challenges, concerns, and questions. We are an innovative people. One of the schools on Gashrai decided to turn a used and broken down bus into a science experimentation place for their students. Containers are popping up all over the FSM Islands as places of businesses and even homes. We are finding ways to cope with the challenges placed before us. And like President Theodore Roosevelt once stated, which reads, and I quote, "This country will not be a good place for all of us to live in unless we make it a good place for all of us to live in," end quote. And we will make it a good place for all to live in. For you, for me, for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, proponents. We will now hear the summation or the conclusion from the opponents, and you have 4 minutes.
In conclusion, while the 1951 Refugee Convention aims to assist those fleeing danger, implementing it in a place like the FSM presents significant challenges. First, we already gave instances in our main speech on how the FSM is limited in resources, both in terms of living space, food, and resources, making it difficult to provide the obligations required by the convention at the moment. Secondly, the FSM is not financially capable to take in refugees and is still underdeveloped. The FSM still depends a lot on the Compact of Free Association for financial assistance. The underdevelopment in infrastructure and shortage in the workforce would cause damage to our states within the FSM. It is too costly to make the decision of passing a resolution without considering the toll it would have on the FSM, the departments, and the people. Lastly, the problems and risk that it would pose for the FSM is not worth it. Strain on its services and tensions that might arise within our nation. Given these realities, it's evident that the FSM currently lacks the capacity to effectively stick to the 1951 Refugee Convention. What we need is an adaptive plan that acknowledges our unique challenges while still addressing the needs of those seeking refuge. This alternative approach must be practical and sustainable, ensuring that we can extend a helping hand to those in need while also safeguarding the well-being of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, opponents. That concludes the argument from both the proponents and the opponents. And now we will give the judges to ask questions if they have. And the questions are only for clarifications on the statements that you presented.
First, I'd like to congratulate both teams. We both did wonderful presentations. Both should be very, very proud. I can see how much research you put into these topics. I have a question first for the opponent team sheet. And the focus, I think, of the debate has been on the fact that refugees will be coming from abroad to the FSM. But I wanted to just ask if it would change your opinion if many of the refugees are actually coming from the FSM to somewhere else. And specifically, there are circumstances of, for example, climate change, where many of the Pacific Islands habitats are being threatened, and the sea levels are rising, and especially some of the outer islands around Chuuk itself are disappearing. Would the Refugee Convention, or would it potentially help Chuukese FSM citizens?
I would like to say first, in the 1951 Refugee Convention, it does mention the FSM, right? But under the 1951 Refugee Convention, climate change is affecting us, but we wouldn't be considered as refugees to the 1951 Refugee Convention. So it wouldn't help us in any way. That's all.
Thank you. And I have a question for Team Koshran. Again, it's a very similar question. Sea level rise, climate change. Is this going to create a situation where FSM citizens may be seeking relief in other countries and leaving the FSM as opposed to coming in, refugees coming in? Ultimately, do you think that this convention, the definition is broad enough to include those climate refugees? I think the current definition under the 1951 Refugee Convention is broad enough to include FSM citizens leaving
I would say that the 1951 Refugee Convention, although climate-induced displacement is of great importance, the topic at hand is for forced displacement. Climate-induced displacement for us, even though it wouldn't count as an official refugee, it's still not part of the topic at hand that we are discussing at the moment.
Thank you. My question is for the opponent team. You had mentioned in your argument that one of the advantages of the FSM joining the convention is increased resource mobilization. Would you be able to clarify on that? Can you hear me? Yeah. Yes, you had stated in your argument mobilization of resources. Please give please clarify on that statement.
Thank you, Judge, for your question. When we mention resource, we mean the skills and the financial aid, all this like finance aid that are being brought to our islands along with these refugees. So we have one resource. Does that answer the question?
My question is for Team Chuuk. So on your point of not having to join the convention itself in order to assist the refugees, so what other means or alternatives that FSM can look into to assist the refugees without resorting to financing it? Convention?
So what we mean by providing assistance is the UN and other nations in the convention, they provide financial support. So we can help by providing financial support or even workers to help the refugees. But joining the 1951 Refugee Convention would be having to follow the legal obligations and everything in the convention. And so hosting refugees is a part of that. But what I'm saying is we are unable to in our current state, and so we shouldn't join the convention. But I'm not saying that we shouldn't help the refugees. We can help in any other way.
Thank you, judges. I think that concludes the questions from the panel. And once again, I would like to join the judges to thank the debaters for the awesome presentation you made. You guys did a great job. That concludes your debate. Thank you. And the next debate would be between Team Pohnpei 2, that's Holland, versus Team Yan. proponents of the proposition, Ms. Dean Convey. 2, Our Lady of Mercy Catholic School, and debating on the opponent of the proposition, Ms. Dean Yap. And the proposition is the same. It reads, "Be it resolved that the Federated States of Micronesia should become a signatory member of the 1951 Refugee Convention." So, we will begin by hearing the introduction from both sides. We will begin with the proponent's introduction, and you have 3 minutes for your introduction.
Ladies and gentlemen, judges resolve, the Federated States of Micronesia should become a signatory of the 1951 Refugee Convention. Knock knock, who's there? Refugees. It is a simple question with profound implications echoing the plight of millions seeking refuge and safety worldwide. Today, I stand before you as an advocate for compassion, humanity, and international responsibility. The FSM, a nation renowned for its warmth and hospitality, finds itself at a crossroads, confronted with the question of whether to become a signatory of the 1951 Refugee Convention. This convention, born out of the ashes of World War II, represents a beacon of hope for those fleeing persecution, violence, and oppression. By becoming a signatory, Micronesia would reaffirm its commitment to upholding the fundamental right and dignity of every individual regardless of their nationality or circumstance. Furthermore, joining the Refugee Convention would not only serve as a symbol of solidarity with the global community, but also as a pragmatic step towards addressing the challenges of forced displacement. Micronesia, like many other nations, faces its own vulnerabilities, from environmental threats to economic uncertainty. However, by standing in solidarity with refugees, Micronesia can amplify its voice on the international stage, advocating for greater support and cooperation for addressing the root causes of displacement. Let us not forget that behind every statistic, there is a human face, a story of resilience and courage in the face of unimaginable adversity. By extending a hand of compassion to refugees, Micronesia can not only enrich its own cultural tapestry, but also embody the values of compassion and solidarity that defines us as a nation. As we stand on the precipice of history, let us heed the call of our conscience and embrace our shared humanity. Let us say, with unwavering resolve, that no one should be left behind, no one should be denied their basic rights, and no one should be turned away in their time of need. For in the end, it is not just the fate of the refugee that hangs in the balance, but the fate of our collective humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, proponents. We will now hear the introduction from the opponents, and you have 3 minutes.
Greetings, Kasilalia, Mohatin, Rananin, Leno. Kamaranda, everyone. Before we begin, we would like to pay respects to the spirits of these great lands, our elders, and the people of Chuuk and the Federated States of Micronesia. We ask for your patience and your understanding as we try our best in our arguments to express our arguments to you, and your forgiveness for any mistakes that we may commit as we mean no disrespect in our debate. Good afternoon to all dignitaries and members of the audience, those visiting, and those who have come to participate in this debate. We would like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the honorable judges, our opposing teams, the coaches, and the audience. My name is Fancy Alware. With me is my partner, Kalala Ligyat, and our alternative speaker, Anthony Rupan. We we are representing the state of Yap, and we are the opposing team who are against the resolution that states, and I quote, "Be it resolved that the Federated States of Micronesia should become a member of the 1951 Refugee Convention." End quote. FSM is a small island developing state, and becoming a signatory member of this convention will only exacerbate the burden that is already present on our islands. As an island nation that is still struggling and still in the process of developing, we need to first better our economies and living standards before welcoming others. As the saying goes, why worry about a speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? So, we should first help develop our country before trying to address the needs of others. We can never be fully committed to helping other people, let alone refugees, when we cannot help ourselves yet. My team and I have come up with 3 main points why our country should not agree and take part in the resolution. Our first point is social issues. Second, national security. And our third and final point is the burden on our resources. In our main argument, we the proponents will prove that becoming a member of the 1951 Refugee Convention is dangerous to our nation and will squander our resources. By using evidence, facts, and professional opinions, it will be shown that the convention is wasteful to our small developing country. Thank you.
Thank you, opponents. We will now move on and hear the main arguments, and we will begin with proponents' main argument. And you have 15 minutes.
Esteemed judges, my dear opponents, ladies and gentlemen. Knock knock, who's there? Refugees. Beyond a mere question, this should serve as a stark reminder of the humanity behind the debate at hand held today. Now, let us delve into why the Federated States of Micronesia should embrace and say yes to the 1951 Refugee Convention, armed with many compelling arguments and many historical evidence. Our argument number 1 has on to why we should say yes is about preparedness. In the face of uncertainty, preparedness is paramount. Micronesia's past experiences, like the sudden arrival of the 34 Indian and Nepalese refugees arriving in Yap State on November 7, 2014, demonstrate the urgent need for readiness in handling refugee crisis. Because of unpreparedness, the Yap State as well as the FSM were unsure as on what to do. It took 18 months to figure out who among those 34 men were the real refugees, and it took 3 long years for 4 refugees to be finally resettled into Sweden. Look to Canada's response to the Indo-Chinese refugee crisis in the 1970s, where Canada's Operation Magnet saw the resettlement of over 60,000 refugees, working together with government officials as well as private sponsors to integrate those refugees into society. These refugees have since then been significantly contributing to Canada's cultural and economic landscape. As Dwight D. Eisenhower, the 34th President of the United States, once wisely noted, and I quote, "In preparing for battle, I've always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable." End quote. By joining the 1951 Refugee Convention, Micronesia can emulate such preparedness, ensuring the safety and well-being of refugees while bolstering regional stability. Additionally, becoming a member to the 1951 Refugee Convention would facilitate international support and resources, enhancing Micronesia's capacity to respond effectively to future crises. Argument number 2, protection for climate refugees. Climate change knows no borders, and it is no secret that Micronesia is on the front lines of experiencing its devastating, dreadful, and harmful impacts. History tells us of Kiribatis' plight, facing the existential threat due to the rising of sea levels. Like them, Micronesia must be prepared for climate refugees. Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary of the United Nations, once wisely noted, and I quote, Climate change is the single greatest threat to a sustainable future. End quote. And although the 1951 Refugee Convention may not explicitly cover climate refugees, it does offer a framework of protection and international cooperation. Through Micronesia's membership, Micronesia can secure assistance during climate-induced displacement, safeguarding its people and fostering global solidarity. Evidence to this is the relocation of the village of Punatogalao located in Fiji, relocating due to the rising of sea levels, exemplifying the urgency and necessity of such preparedness. By joining the Refugee Convention, Micronesia signaled its commitment to addressing both current and future displacement crisis caused by climate change, aligning with global efforts to combat this issue. Moving on to argument number 3, responsibility sharing. Shouldering the burden alone is neither humane nor sustainable. Micronesia's accession to the 1951 Refugee Convention and dear judges, saying yes to the 1951 Refugee Convention becomes a win-win scenario, allowing Micronesia to promote its stability, diversity, and prosperity for all. Now I welcome my co-debater,
contributed to the workforce and cultural diversity. As an unknown author once stated, and I quote, "Hospitality is simply an opportunity to show love and care." End quote. By embracing the Refugee Convention, Micronesia upholds its tradition and culture of hospitality, embodying the values of compassion and solidarity. The country can leverage international frameworks to support and sustain its efforts, ensuring that refugees receive the help they need while enhancing Micronesia's global reputation. It's not just about obligations. It's about preserving the rights and humanity of every individual. And lastly, argument number 5. It's about humanity. At its core, the debate transcends laws and politics. It speaks to our shared humanity. Reflect on Martin Luther King Jr.'s poignant words, and I quote, "The ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by the good people." And I repeat, the ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by the good people. End quote. By joining the Refugee Convention, Micronesia takes a stand for human rights and dignity. History will judge us not by our words, but by our actions. Let Micronesia be remembered for its compassion, empathy, and unwavering commitment to the inherent worth of every individual. The example of Denmark, which has been a signatory since 1951, shows showcases how a small country can have a big impact by providing refuge and advocating for human rights on the global stage. Together, let us build a future where no one is left behind, where compassion guides our decisions, and where humanity triumphs over adversity. Knock, knock. Who's there? Refugees. Refugees, come in. Welcome to Yap. Welcome to Gombe. Welcome to Chuuk. Welcome to Chuuk. Welcome to the Federated States of Micronesia. Thank you.
Thank you, proponents. We will now hear the rebuttal from the opponents, and you have 5 minutes for your rebuttal.
Thank you, proponents, for your main argument. But with your opponents mentioned about preparedness, as they mentioned before, there were the police and Indian men who arrived in Yap. They stated that Yap was ready. However, Yap was not ready because they couldn't provide any assistance at all. So how are we able to sign the convention with the national government when we are not prepared then? So how are we prepared now? Second point is the protection to climate change. The 1951 Refugee Convention, the language does not reflect our needs. The FSM may not have the capacity or resources to adequately handle the responsibility that come within refugee protection under the convention. This will pose risks to the safety of the nation and refugees themselves. Is it ethically responsible for us to even try to others, even if we have limited resources? Thank you.
Thank you, opponents. Proponents, you now have 3 minutes to respond to opponents' rebuttal.
Good afternoon, judges. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much to our dear opponents for their lovely rebuttal. They tried to oppose 2 of our 5 main arguments. Please allow me, on behalf of my team, to clarify and refresh everyone. Argument number 1, in which they addressed, was about preparedness. While it is true that Micronesia is facing resource constraints, joining the Refugee Convention provides access to international support and assistance, which can help bolster Micronesia's preparedness efforts and fill any gaps in resources or infrastructure. Additionally, while each crisis may indeed be unique, the lessons learned from past experience are invaluable in informing future preparedness efforts. By proactively planning and implementing mechanisms provided by the Convention, Micronesia can better adapt to the specific needs of any future refugee crisis. And I would just like to make a clarification for my main argument number 1. I stated earlier preparedness, but in my argument I stated that Yap was unprepared, not prepared. Moving on to argument number 2, in which they address being protection for climate refugees. While addressing needed concerns is important, it is equally crucial to anticipate and prepare for future challenges, especially those posed by climate change. By joining the Refugee Convention, Micronesia demonstrates foresight and a commitment to protecting its population from potential induced climate displacement. Furthermore, taking proactive measures now can help mitigate the impacts of future crises, ultimately saving the lives and reducing the need for emergency responses down the line. In the end, we, the affirmative side, maintain that our 5 main arguments in favor of the topic is point-based against rock solid. Thank you.
Thank you, proponents. You will now hear the main arguments from the opponents, and you have 15 minutes for your main argument.
As stated in their introduction, we are against the resolution that states that the Federal States of Micronesia should be a signatory member of the 1951 Convention because of 3 main points. The first one is socio-economic issues. Second, safety and security. Last but not least, the third, the burden on resources. Starting with our first point, which is on social and economic issues. As islanders, it is only natural that we worry about the language of this resolution and what it may mean later on, the consequences. These consequences will affect our resources, people, and our economy. Our peoples have cultivated unique and diverse cultures within our Pacific Ocean. As a small island developing state, many would question where the refugees would be placed. Our islands have already existing issues revolving around land, and with the refugees, we would only add on to the problem. When we become a signatory member of the convention, we would have to think and plan out our accommodations. However, the majority of lands are privately owned in FSM. Due to the fact that there are already existing issues regarding land, no landowner would willingly give up their land to accommodate someone else, let alone a refugee. According to the FSM's preliminary report to the NCCD, and I quote, in Coastal Pohnpei, land is both privately state-owned, while marine areas are owned by the state. In Chuuk, most land and marine areas are privately owned and acquired through inheritance, gift, or by recently purchased. In Yap, almost all land and marine areas are owned or managed by individual estates. In all states, land cannot be sold to non-citizens of the FSM, end quote. This is important because our lands have been our primary source for our needs. With the refugees settling in, it would only limit our capability to provide for ourselves. The available land for refugees is limited due to the fact that we live on small islands. Not only because we live on small islands, but our islands are very precious to us for it was from our ancestors. As a current generation, it is our birthright and responsibility to ensure that our islands are available for the next generations to come. Another issue would be our living standards and welfare. The people are also facing issues regarding financial burdens. Many workers are not being paid the amount they are entitled to. An example would be the FSM's minimum wage. For example, according to a 2022 investment report by the State Department, and I quote, the minimum hourly wage for employment with the national government was $2.65. The minimum hourly wage for the government workers in the individual states was Pohnpei for $2, Chuuk for $1.25, Coastal with $1.42, and Yap with $1.60. The FSM's minimum wage was last adjusted January 1, 2015, end quote. While the states in the FSM have incremental changes since 2015 to their minimum wages, they are not uniform improvements and sometimes only affect certain sectors, like the public service systems. By accepting refugees and having to assist them financially will only open ourselves to political backlash. Why is it and how is it that our government can't afford to pay for our workers that they are now planning on taking a new role of financially assisting others? Once again, how is it that we can't help ourselves, but we are trying to take on a bigger responsibility to help another bigger group of people? Before allowing refugees into our islands, we need to have the budget for everything that we provided for them. This includes education, medical assistance, housing, transportation, and other humanitarian aid that they need. So much planning is needed before we allow them into our home islands. In the event that FSM does become a signatory member of the convention, these refugees will undoubtedly encounter social difficulties. One of the main reasons for this is because as refugees, they already have negative stigma against them. They will not be easily welcomed into the local society, especially if they're viewed too harshly. They will have difficulties in interacting with locals or applying for jobs. Existing prejudice could spark social unrest and anger among the locals, leading to anti-immigrant sentiments and potential threats to political stability. This divisive situation could result in harsh policy and further drive a wedge in our society, ultimately causing a political turmoil. According to a 2023 article by The Guardian, refugees in Papua New Guinea, also known as PNG, were being told that they would be evicted after the Australian-sponsored housing bills were not paid. This indicates that this issue is not only recent, but it is still ongoing. Reasons as to why Australia has not paid the bills remain unanswered. This poses many issues as many refugees may be homeless, not have access to medical assistance or any assistance at all. Proceeding to our second point, which is on security and safety. By becoming a member of the 1951 Refugee Convention, we are signing up to accept and assist refugees, among other requirements. By doing so, the FSM needs to take into consideration the safety of our own people and the safety of the refugees as well. For example, PNG is one of the 6 Pacific Island countries as a current signatory member of the convention and have already accepted refugees into their islands. According to the Asylum Seeking Resource Center, the refugees experience violence, threats, and harassments from the locals. Instead of the locals taking care of the refugees' safety was put at risk. They were being separated from their families, the medical needs were neglected, and more humanitarian issues were created due to worsening conditions. In the FSM, one in every 3 women experience physical and/or sexual violence by a partner in their lifetime. Prevalence figures of lifetime physical and/or sexual partner violence were over 50% in all FSM states, according to the UN Population Fund. For example, according to the research by the National Center for Biotechnology Information, there are high rates of domestic violence in Yap alone, where it is shown that 76% of women report at least one form of abuse. This shows that violence is not committed here in the islands. Especially amongst the vulnerable half of our communities, and accepting even more vulnerable groups of people into our nation will worsen situations like these. They are not ordinary people, but refugees who are seeking our help, yet we put their lives and their safeties at risk. We can look at the asylum seekers incident 10 years ago where 34 men were detained in Plonaya from 2014 until 2016. In November 2014, 16 Nepalis and 18 Indian men were detained to the fisheries wharf in Colonia after being caught in the FSM's water. Asylum seekers lived in a hut on the docks for nearly 2 years, especially after their boats sunk, surviving on handouts from the government authorities and the locals. A campaign was launched to help them, but by August 2016, all but 4 have been repatriated. The whole ordeal was draining for the state and national governments, and it became very apparent that local authorities were not capable of providing asylum or even accommodating refugees. Additionally, we have to also think about our safety. As refugees arrive on our islands, they all come from different socioeconomic backgrounds and political environments. We do not know them or what they are capable of, and these are reasonable concerns to have, especially as a nation. The questions that we should be asking ourselves are we able to deal with any problems that occur? Are they able to blend within our environment? And are they able to cooperate with us as we try to help them? We may think that they do no harm to us. What happens if the situation do occur and such dangers happen to us? The safety of our people is put at risk. By signing to be part of this convention, we are allowing refugees into our small island nations who will need constant aid such as medical attention. For example, Yap Memorial Hospital lacks the equipment that is needed for any urgent checkup and space. With the minimal equipment and space available, we are not able to provide them with the full medical attention that they need. As we all know, our hospitals are facing problems. According to the research by the Asia Pacific Report, Yap Memorial Hospital is facing problems with being understaffed. That is true in all of our state hospitals. Although we have doctors from abroad to help out with our hospitals, staffing, financing, and misunderstandings regarding healthcare rights continue to be major issues for the system as a whole. By becoming part of this convention, it will only be an addition to the problems that we already have. Another reason that revolves around security and safety is that our capacity to handle such types of displaced peoples in situations is minimal. For example, our international airports are relatively small. With more people being exported to our islands, screening becomes increasingly difficult and may not be properly done because of the small spaces are provided. We live on small islands with less equipment. We can take a look back to the experiences during COVID-19 pandemic, where quarantine had to happen. And yet, due to the fewer spaces we had, multiple extra buildings such as the Maxton Sport Complex and SA Bay View Hotel were used due to the unavailable or inadequate quarantine spaces available. Housing was a huge problem that they had to turn to hotels and other quarantine options in order for everyone to be safe. Security was a factor in these arguments, but even amongst our people, we had security concerns pertaining to maintaining quarantine and even an eventual breach of quarantine. If we ourselves cannot successfully police ourselves in situations of emergencies, then how do we expect as a nation to safely and securely manage refugees? One may argue that countries such as Papua New Guinea, Fiji, and Samoa are Pacific Island countries that are signatory members of the convention, with some of them, including Australia, having experience with processing refugees. But these are much larger countries in terms of land masses, populations, and technical expertise. The FSM cannot be fairly compared to them. On top of that, the FSM tends to be geopolitically placed in precarious situations, especially due to tensions between the West and neighboring Asian countries. For example, the FSM has already seen instances of asylum seekers, as previously mentioned, and according to the Center for Security Studies at Zurich Research University, the FSM is among the most vulnerable of migration states. I quote, "Officials are poorly trained and paid, money is very short, and the country covers a vast expanse of sea. The population is unsophisticated and trans-Pacific cocaine route passes through the FSM," end quote. The result of the study indicate that FSM is vulnerable, especially as a pathway to transnational crime across the Pacific. This further puts the FSM's already poor national security at risk. The national security of the FSM would need to be strengthened to assure that the people are kept safe from any forms of terrorism or international violence, a concern that can be highly draining on our islands already meager resources. Now let's move on to our last and final point, the burden of our resources. As we all know, our island nation is a small developing state. By accepting to be part of the convention, we're also bringing a burden into our islands. Land is already a resource that we mentioned to be already limited, but the FSM faces several significant challenges that illustrate why it has limited resources to be a signatory member of the 1951 Refugee Convention, such as 1. Geographic and demographic limitations, 2. Underdeveloped infrastructure, 3. Environmental liability, and 4. Dependence on international aid, among many others. In summary, Micronesia's economic limitations and infrastructural deficits, geographic challenges, administrative capacity constraints, environmental vulnerabilities, dependence on international aid, and underdeveloped social services collectively underscore why the country has limited resources to fulfill the obligations of the 1951 Refugee Convention. These factors make it difficult for Micronesia to provide adequate protection and support for refugees while addressing its own pressing domestic violence, domestic challenges. We need to understand that by accepting these refugees, more problems will only arise due to public perception and political backlash. The concern for security and safety and the burdens on our resources and us as people of those islands. Thank you.
Thank you, opponents, for your main argument. Proponents, you now have 5 minutes to respond to opponent's main argument.
Judges, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Our dear opponents expressed 3 arguments to support their stand against the FSM as a signatory of the 1951 Refugee Convention. For us in the affirmative team, we find all their arguments unacceptable. Our opponent's first argument was social-economic issues. We find this unacceptable because hosting refugees can bring economic benefits such as job creation and increased consumption, which can contribute to local development efforts and workforce. In their argument, they also mentioned cultural issues. Integrating refugees into Micronesian society can enrich cultural diversity and foster cross-cultural understanding and tolerance. While there may be challenges in the initial stages of integration, history has shown that diverse societies can thrive and benefit from multiculturalism. Micronesia's tradition of hospitality and resilience can help facilitate the integration process, ensuring that refugees are welcomed and supported as valuable members of the community. Our opponent's second argument was security risks. We find this objectionable because security concerns are valid but manageable through proper screening and vetting procedures. The 1951 Refugee Convention includes provisions for protecting national security interests, allowing Micronesia to implement appropriate security measures while fulfilling its humanitarian obligations. Additionally, hosting refugees in a safe and stable environment can contribute to regional security and stability by addressing the root causes of conflict and displacement. In our opponent's last argument was resource constraints. We find this inadmissible because while it's true that Micronesia faces resource constraints, signing the Refugee Convention opens doors to international assistance and support for refugee management. The convention provides access to funding, technical expertise, and humanitarian aid from other signatory countries and organizations, helping alleviate the burden on Micronesia's resources. In conclusion, by embracing compassion over fear, solidarity over isolation, and humanity over indifference, Micronesia has the opportunity to lead by example, fostering a world where dignity, justice, and hope prevail. Do you agree that Micronesians are welcoming and hospitable? Yes. Are you Micronesians? Yes. So let the FSM be a signatory of the 1951 Refugee Convention. Thank you.
Thank you, proponents. Opponents, you have 3 minutes now to respond to the proponents.
Thank you, proponents, for your rebuttal. I will now address your statements. Let me first shift everyone's attention to 2014, when the Napoleons and the Indians arrived in Yap. First of all, these refugees came to our islands, and after they left, they did nothing to benefit our country. And second, if we were to take in these refugees, where exactly would the screenings take place? What land would we provide for the refugees to live on? What money do we have to provide resources for them in order to be stable on our islands? Although our finances may be covered by other donor countries and organizations, our lands cannot. We have limited space on our islands, and therefore, we cannot easily give up our islands to host refugees that may come in huge numbers. And lastly, aren't they all refugees? We cannot expect them to have skills in the first place, and we cannot expect them to come to our islands and give back to our economy, as we are the ones who are supposed to be helping them. Thank you.
Thank you, opponents. We now come to the summation or the conclusion from both proponents and opponents, and we will begin with the closing from the proponents, and you have 4 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed judges, and fellow debaters, as we near the conclusion of this vital discourse, let us revisit the essence of our deliberations. Knock, knock, who's there? Refugees. This simple question encapsulates the moral imperatives that underpins our debate today. Throughout our discussions, we've explored the compelling reasons as to why the Federated States of Micronesia should unequivocally embrace the 1951 Refugee Convention. From the imperative of preparedness, bolstered by historical lessons, to the urgent need to protect climate refugees in the face of environmental upheaval, each argument has woven a tapestry. tapestry of compassion, solidarity, and pragmatism. we've examined the principle of responsibility sharing, recognizing that the burden of hosting refugees cannot and should not fall solely on the shoulders of one nation. Micronesia's accession to the convention heralds a new era of cooperation where the collective strength of nations are marshaled to provide refuge and hope to those in need. Our discourse has celebrated Micronesia's rich cultural heritage of hospitality, illustrating how the values of compassion and empathy are not just ideals but are lived with reality. And finally, we've reaffirmed that beyond legalities and politics, the decision to join the Refugee Convention is a testament to our shared humanity, a declaration that every individual's rights and dignity must be upheld and protected. But let us not conclude with mere words. Let us end with a resounding call to action, a declaration that echoes through the annals of history. Let us proclaim with unwavering resolve and unyielding determination that in the face of adversity, in the presence of suffering, and in the pursuit of justice, Micronesia stands as a beacon of hope, a bastion of compassion, and a champion of humanity. For in the end, it's not just Micronesia's fate that hangs in the balance, but the fate of all humanity. Let us choose compassion over indifference, solidarity over isolation, and hope over despair. And may this decision resonate not only in this room, but across the globe, inspiring others to follow in our footsteps and usher in a future where no one is left behind, where rights and dignity of every human being are upheld, and where humanity reigns supreme. Are Yapis, Chuukis, Persians, and Bombayans welcoming and hospitable? Yes, we are. Knock, knock. Who's there? Refugees. Refugees, come in. Yes to FSM as a signatory member of the 1951 Refugee Convention. God bless the Federated States of Micronesia. God bless us all. Thank you.
Thank you, proponents. We will now hear the conclusion from the opponents, and you have 4 minutes.
Taking everything into account, we would like to thank the affirmative team for their points and evidence. Although we are arguing against the resolution, we also understand the affirmative side of the argument. However, we want to remind and bring to your attention why we are strongly against being a member of the 1951 Refugee Convention. Our first reason being social issues will arise. Second, the security and safety of our people and the refugees themselves. And finally, the burden on our resources that the resolution will cause. Social issues are important considerations because where are these refugees going to settle and on whose lands? Are we capable of addressing issues such as this? Or if we cannot, what are we going to do? Secondly, security concerns are crucial to address in order to protect the safety and well-being of the people of the FSM. And finally, the potential burden on our resources should be taken into account to ensure that the government can effectively support both its citizens and any refugees that may be granted protection. These factors highlight the importance of carefully weighing the implications of joining the 1951 Refugee Convention to ensure that it aligns with the overall goal and capabilities of the FSM. Becoming a signatory member of the 1951 Refugee Convention is essentially prioritizing the needs of others over our own. Once again, we are against the resolution because of the social issues it will cause, national security, and the burden on our resources. Is our country ready to take on a task such as this? And although it may be the right thing to do, it is not realistic. Our islands cannot take on a task such as this. Additionally, are our people and the community ready to take on this task? Thank you.
Thank you, opponents. We will now move down to the questioning part. And the judges will now ask questions for clarification on the points that you presented.
Thank you. I have a question for each team. I'll begin with the proponents. In your arguments, you mentioned that there are some resources that would become available to the FSM if and when the FSM becomes a signatory state. Is that correct? Would you be able to give an example of a signatory state that was able to get these different types of resources when they were asked to host any refugees? Essentially, do you have an example of a successful story?
Okay, thank you. Would you please rephrase that question, please?
So in light of the other side's argument, we don't have the resources, it may be burdensome for us. Your argument is that you understand that might be the situation. However, if we become a signatory state, there will be resources that will become available to us. So my question is, do you have an example of a signatory state that was able to receive resources when they were asked to host refugees?
Okay, thank you for rephrasing that. I believe the case that we mentioned earlier was Uganda that led to your question, but unfortunately we didn't really look into the specific resources that they provided to the country itself. Thank you.
Thank you. And my last question would be to the other side. So how would you respond to the opposing side's argument that it is to this idea of shared responsibility, that we are in this together? So, one of their arguments, or I guess it touches throughout their arguments, that there's this idea of shared responsibility. We have to all take part in helping each other out. So my question is, how would you respond to that argument in light of your argument that it's going to be an economic, restraints and all, we have economic restraints and we have these issues that basically say we're not ready for that. And their argument on the other side is humanity, shared responsibility, Micronesian way. So how would you respond to that argument?
Thank you. So although sharing responsibility and when we were doing our research, there was no evidence that any country has ever been able to actually share burdens amongst refugees. Nauru, for example, Nauru was used by Australia to host refugees, and at the end of that, Nauru struggled a lot because of what Australia did. And as the FSM, we have, like for example, we have many limited lands, and even though we may work together, we will not be able to provide the land that is needed to house these refugees, as there are 1,000 of them, or even millions in the world today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we continue on the questioning part, just to remind the debaters that the role of an alternate is just to help out the main speakers on the notes or the ideas that we will present. And the main speakers are the ones only allowed to take the podium and present their points. Thank you.
Thank you to both debate teams. I have two questions as well. The first question is to the proponents of Team 2. In your argument here today, you argued that Fiji's framework on relocation of climate refugees serves as an example to small island Pacific states and can be used to guide the FSM. Now, given that Fiji's development has progressed more than the FSM and that they have a different parliamentary legal system, please clarify for us what infrastructure Fiji has in place that actually supports refugees that the FSM will need.
Thank you for that question, but can you please restate that question again?
Yes, your team argued today that Fiji is an example of a small Pacific island state that has addressed refugees, particularly about a relocation for climate refugee status, I believe. Fiji is different than the FSM. Their development progress, their legal system, particularly how the state's powers and national powers work are different. So what would the FSM need in order to try to use Fiji as an example, right? What infrastructure or things did Fiji do to prepare themselves to address this displacement of climate refugees?
Okay, thank you for that. While we were researching, we really didn't take into account what the point you just made. So right now, I'm quite unsure of how to answer. I just want to clarify that we just use that as a statement for climate refugees, not considering the fact that they are far much more economically developed compared to the FSM. Thank you.
Thank you, Pompey. My next question is for the YAP team, for the opponents. Your team argued today that the FSM is particularly vulnerable to provide adequate protection and a security process to screen refugees. So what are the security measures would you recommend for the national government or the states to implement so that we can actually accept refugees?
Thank you for your question. The answer is, for the FSM to be, in order for the FSM to host refugees, we need to have more resources and better screening and a better police control. Thank you.
So, before I ask my question, I just want to say that I'm very impressed with both teams today. You all did very well, and it'll definitely be a challenge to decide on the outcome, so you should all be very proud of yourselves. I do have one question for Team Pompey. My question is, what is your response, or what are your thoughts on the YAP team's points on issues with that with respect to accommodating refugees?
Do you have a response to that question?
Okay, so about limited land, first off, thank you for that question. About limited land, so limited land is just based on how many refugees are gonna come, and it's not it's not sure, or we're not positive that millions of refugees are going to come, because, for example, back in 2014, yeah, only 34 refugees came, not a million. And it is not that these people want to stay here. They're not staying here. It's just that they're just seeking refuge and safety, of course, with the hopes and of going back home. So they have no intention of taking our land and staying here forever. And also, if we were to become a signatory, of course the government would help out with that. There are many private lands, but the government also owns land, and yes, that will be my answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you, judges. I think that comes to the end of the questioning from the judges. And once again, thank the judges and thank the debaters for the great job, because you all did well on your presentation. Congratulations, and that concludes your debate. Thank you. Let's give them a big round of applause. That's the last debate for today. Tomorrow we will convene here tomorrow at 9 to complete the 2 remaining debates for this year's Law Day debate. So for today, that's it for today, and we'll see you all tomorrow at 9.